The first time I met my fiancé's parents, his mom stood up at the dinner table, looked me straight in the eye, and threw a glass of red wine in my face. The room went completely still. She tilted her head and said, "That's to disinfect a poor girl like you." Then she looked at her son, my fiancé, and said, "If she wants to marry you, she needs to pay $300,000. Cash." He laughed, not the kind of nervous laugh people do when they're uncomfortable either. He laughed like it was funny, like he was proud of her. I wiped the wine from my eyes, took a slow breath, and said, "I'm canceling all business with your company." That's when everything stopped. The forks, the fake smiles, the family power games, silent, frozen. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just the girl dating their son. I was the CEO of the company keeping theirs afloat. My name is Jasmine Carter. I'm 28 years old and I built my company from the ground up. I don't come from money. I didn't go to an Ivy League school or grow up taking ski trips to Aspen. I'm the daughter of a nurse and a mechanic from Pittsburgh, and I spent most of my 20s coding in my tiny apartment while living off cheap coffee and frozen pizza. I wasn't trying to be a CEO. I just wanted to create something that mattered. And I did. By the time I met Landon Calloway, I had 3 full-time employees, 1 major government contract, and a client list that was starting to scare people twice my age. Landon came into my life like something out of a movie. Tall, polished, confident. The kind of man who knows which wine to order and actually pronounces the names right. We met at a tech conference in San Diego. He was speaking on a panel about legacy manufacturing. I was there pitching AI logistics to potential partners. He introduced himself after my session and told me he liked the way I didn't apologize for knowing what I was talking about. That was the first time I felt seen by someone who didn't feel the need to shrink me. We started dating a few weeks later. From the outside, it looked like the perfect pairing. Me, the scrappy startup founder, and him, the heir to a $100 million manufacturing empire. But inside, it felt quieter than that. We cooked dinner together. We argued about which 90s sitcom was better. He kissed my forehead when I fell asleep reading reports. For a while, I actually believed I'd found someone who didn't care about where I came from. It wasn't perfect. There were little things. He hated how I dressed for meetings. Too sharp, too masculine, he said. He teased me when I ordered cheap wine at restaurants. He'd laugh off serious conversations with a wink and change the subject when I asked about long-term plans, but nothing that set off alarms. Not yet. I met his friends first. They were fine. Polite, a little distant. They asked a lot of questions about how I made my money, like they couldn't believe a girl with a state school degree could build something on her own. One night, one of his college buddies pulled me aside at a party and asked if I was really in love with Landon, or if I was just in love with the idea of him. I smiled and said both. It wasn't entirely a joke. The thing was, I hadn't met his parents yet. He told me they were intense and traditional. He said his mother was protective and a little high-strung, but ultimately well-meaning. He warned me that she might ask invasive questions, that she had opinions about class, but not to take anything personally. I believed him. I assumed that, like many successful families, they had their quirks and boundaries. I could handle difficult people. I'd been underestimated and patronized my entire career. His mother wouldn't scare me. But I didn't know what I was walking into. Before the dinner, I remember standing in front of the mirror and second-guessing every single thing I wore. I changed 3 times. Landon said I looked fine, and then joked that I shouldn't wear my work face. I asked what that meant. He just shrugged and said, "You know, the face you make when you're trying to win a deal." I smiled and let it go, but it stayed with me. On the drive to his parents' house, estate, he kept checking his watch and fiddling with his cufflinks. I asked if he was nervous. He said, "Not nervous, just prepared." He kept using that word, prepared, like we were going into a negotiation, not a family gathering. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt like I'd been dropped into a different universe, the kind where people park your car for you and greet you by your full name. The staff all wore uniforms. The marble foyer had art on the walls I'd seen in museums. I took a deep breath and told myself that people are people, no matter how many commas are in their bank account. His father, Richard, was polite, cool but not unkind. He shook my hand like he was greeting a junior executive, not his son's fiancée. His mother, Veronica, looked me over from head to toe without saying a word. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that feels like a warning, that dinner would change everything. But sitting there at that long table, sipping from a crystal glass I wasn't sure I could afford to replace, I still thought I had a chance to win them over. I thought that if I showed them I wasn't after Landon's money, they'd see me for who I was. A woman who built something on her own. A woman who loved their son. What I didn't know was that they had already decided who I was, and nothing I said would change that. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. High ceilings, long mahogany table, gold-rimmed plates. The chandelier above us sparkled like it had never known dust. Landon pulled out my chair and smiled like nothing was off. I returned the smile because I still believed this was going to be fine, that all the tension I felt walking in was just nerves and not something real. Veronica sat at the head of the table, draped in a cream silk blouse and diamond earrings that probably cost more than my first car. Her husband, Richard, sat silently to her left, nodding occasionally, sipping from a heavy glass of bourbon. Sloane, Landon's younger sister, was across from me. She smiled now and then, but her eyes stayed low, like she was trying not to watch the train she knew was about to crash. The first few minutes were harmless. Veronica asked where I grew up, where I went to school, what my parents did for a living. But none of it sounded curious. It sounded clinical, like a background check disguised as polite conversation. I answered each question clearly, confidently, and with a smile. But I could feel her measuring me, cataloging my answers like she already had the conclusion and was just looking for proof. Landon, to his credit, tried to keep things light. He joked about my inability to cook anything that didn't come out of a box and told a story about the time we got lost hiking and I took over with a GPS app and a ridiculous amount of stubbornness. I laughed, and so did Sloane. Richard cracked a grin. Veronica didn't. She swirled her wine slowly, watching me the entire time. Midway through dinner, the energy shifted. I had just finished explaining how my company had turned down a major investor because we refused to compromise our ethical guidelines. It was something I was proud of. But Veronica set her glass down with a thud and said, "So you're saying you walked away from money? That doesn't sound smart or realistic." Landon tried to interject. "Mom, Jas is doing great on her own." She ignored him. "Great is relative," she said, turning back to me. "And I think what's more important is understanding your role now. You're not just playing entrepreneur anymore. You're aligning yourself with a legacy family, my family. That requires a different kind of thinking, a different class of behavior." I sat up straighter and smiled, but it was the kind of smile you wear like armor. I said, "Respectfully, I built my company without a legacy. I plan to keep building it that way." That's when it happened. Veronica picked up her glass of red wine. Her hand didn't shake. Her expression didn't change. She stood up, leaned slightly over the table, and threw the contents of the glass directly in my face. Not a splash, not a spill, a deliberate act. The wine hit my cheeks, soaked my blouse, ran into my lap, and the whole table went dead silent. I didn't flinch. I was too shocked to. My hands gripped the edge of my chair. I looked at her, blinking the sting away from my eyes. She said in the same calm voice she used when asking about my college degree, "That's to disinfect a poor girl." Then she set the empty glass down and said, "If you want to marry my son, you will pay $300,000 to this family. A dowry, a demonstration that you understand what you're joining." For a second, no one moved. Landon laughed. Actually laughed. A sharp, short sound, as if what just happened was a scene from a dark comedy, and he couldn't believe his mother had the nerve to go through with it. I turned to look at him, waiting, hoping, wanting him to do something, to say this was unacceptable, but he just kept laughing and said, "Come on, babe, she's just testing you. Don't take it so seriously." Testing me. That was the word he used, like humiliation was a game, like dignity was negotiable. I reached for a napkin, wiped my face, and gently dabbed at my shirt. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but my hands were steady. I looked across the table and saw Sloane, frozen, staring at her plate. Richard's face was unreadable. No one stopped it. No one defended me. No one apologized. I leaned back in my chair and smiled, not with warmth, but with clarity. I wasn't angry yet. I was awake. Something had cracked wide open in that moment, and all the illusions I had about this family, this man, and this engagement began to dissolve. The food in front of me was untouched. The wine dripped onto the linen napkin in my lap. The air in the room was cold, but my mind was sharp. I looked at Veronica, who seemed so sure she had put me in my place, and I decided I would never play the part she wanted me to. I had earned everything I had. No one was going to reduce me to a line item or a trophy. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to show her what real power looked like. Not by yelling, not by crying, but by walking out of that house with every ounce of my self-respect intact. And when I did strike back, it would be with precision. I didn't speak on the drive home. Not a single word. My blouse was still damp. My skin smelled like Merlot. I could feel it drying in my hair, sticky and sour. Landon drove like nothing had happened. At one point, he turned the music on. Some mindless pop song filled the car. I stared out the window, counting the lights on the highway, feeling my hands buzz with something I couldn't yet name. "Are you mad?" he asked halfway through the ride. I turned my head and looked at him. "Do you think I'm mad?" He glanced at me, grinning like we were in on some private joke. It was dramatic, sure, but come on, it's not personal. My mom does stuff like that to test people. "She assaulted me," I said, "in front of you, in your home, and you laughed." Landon sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "She grew up in a different world. You can't take everything she says literally. You know how high society works. It's all theater. She wanted to see if you could handle the pressure. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to see if you're strong enough for this family." I didn't respond. I turned back to the window. He didn't say anything else after that. The silence thickened, not in a comforting way, but like a fog neither of us knew how to clear. When he dropped me off, he leaned over for a kiss. I got out of the car and closed the door. Inside my apartment, I peeled off the ruined blouse and dropped it into the trash. My chest felt tight. Not like heartbreak, not quite. It felt like the edge of something sharp pressing against the inside of my skin. I washed my face twice. Still, the smell lingered. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at nothing. I kept hearing her voice, flat and clean, calling me a poor girl. I kept seeing Landon's face, relaxed and entertained, like he'd just watched a scene from a bad reality show. My phone buzzed. A text from him. "Let's not make this a bigger deal than it is. I love you. She'll come around." I didn't respond. The next morning, I told my assistant to cancel my meetings. I needed space. I needed time to think, and not just about the engagement. This wasn't just a family problem. It was something bigger, something more tangled. I kept asking myself, why would a woman with that much power, that much money, go to such lengths to tear me down? What exactly was she trying to protect? I tried to replay the dinner in my head, frame by frame. Her questions, her timing. The moment she lost her composure enough to throw wine, but controlled her tone enough to keep her status. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate, strategic. I started to feel less shocked and more curious. Later that afternoon, I called my best friend, Kiara. She'd known me since high school. The kind of friend who doesn't sugarcoat anything. I told her everything. There was a long pause on the line before she said, "And you didn't walk out?" I stayed. I wiped my face. I sat there and listened. Why? I needed to see how far she'd go. "Girl, you were tested, yes, but not for strength. That was a show of dominance. You passed it by not flipping the table." I didn't want to admit how much that stung, how angry I was at myself for staying seated. But there was a part of me that knew I had done the right thing by staying quiet in that moment. Reacting would have given her more power. Watching gave me control. That night, I got another text from Landon. "Just spoke to my mom. She thinks you're feisty. That's progress. Want to come by tomorrow?" I stared at the screen and felt something shift. Not just disappointment, not confusion, something colder. The man I had built a future with didn't understand the difference between a joke and an attack. And worse, he didn't care to learn. He was raised by that behavior. He had adapted to it, maybe even admired it. And that terrified me more than the whine or the insult. I wanted to believe he just didn't know better, that he was caught in the middle, that he loved me in a way that would eventually rise above the dysfunction. But now, I wasn't sure. Maybe he had never planned to protect me at all. Maybe I had been nothing more than a resume booster, a modern accessory to make his old money life look relevant. I scrolled through our photos, the vacation in Cabo, the trip to Chicago, his arm always around me, always pulling me into the frame. I looked happy in every single one. But now I couldn't remember feeling that way. The confusion wasn't just about what happened, it was about who I had been with the entire time. What kind of man watches the woman he loves get humiliated and says nothing? What kind of man calls that love? I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything across the room. I opened my laptop. I started reading contracts. I looked at the numbers. And for the first time since that dinner, I felt grounded again. Not emotional, not confused, focused. Because if Veronica thought I was just a poor girl trying to climb into their world, she had made the worst mistake possible. She underestimated me. 2 days after the dinner, Sloan showed up at my office. I hadn't told Landon where I'd be. I had been keeping my distance. I wasn't angry anymore, not outwardly at least, but something inside me had hardened. I wasn't going to cry to him or beg for understanding. I had gone into strategy mode. Still, when my assistant buzzed to say Sloan Calloway was waiting in the lobby, I felt my stomach tighten. I met her at the entrance and led her into a small conference room. She looked nervous. Not shy, not fragile. Nervous like someone who had something important to say but wasn't sure how to start. She wore jeans, a plain sweater, and no makeup, which made her seem even younger than she was. She sat across from me, curled her hands in her lap, and said, "I'm sorry. I know I should have said something that night. You didn't owe me anything," I said, "but I appreciate you being here." She looked around the room at the whiteboards filled with notes, the sketches on my tablet, the contracts on the table. Her eyes landed back on mine. "You built all this yourself?" I nodded. "I figured," she said. "That's why she hates you." I leaned back slightly, surprised by her bluntness. "She doesn't hate you because you're poor. She hates you because you're powerful, because you walked into that house without needing anything from her. My mother only respects women she can control." I didn't speak. I let her keep going. "She's destroyed every woman Landon's ever brought home, but none of them made it this far. You're the first one he proposed to, and the only one who has anything she can't buy or bully." "What about your father?" I asked. Sloan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He doesn't get involved. He's made his peace with her methods, keeps the money flowing and stays quiet." "And Landon?" She hesitated. "He's not like her, but he's not like her either. He's used to her kind of love, cruel, transactional, conditional. He doesn't know how to recognize anything else." I looked down at the table. My notes from the morning stared back at me. Projections, partnership terms, an email draft to a potential investor. The life I had built was organized, precise, and mine. The life I was supposed to marry into felt more like a trap every day. "I think she targeted you early," Sloan said, "before you ever stepped in the house." "What do you mean?" "I overheard her on a call 2 weeks ago. She was talking to someone in legal about putting pressure on one of her suppliers. I didn't understand the details, but she said your name. She knew your company had the power to block her expansion deal. She called you a reckless little problem and said marrying Landon wouldn't save you if you kept interfering with her contracts." That made everything click into place. The coldness at dinner wasn't social discomfort. The wine wasn't about class. It was about power. I hadn't just entered her family. I had stepped directly into her way, and she wasn't used to obstacles. I stood and walked to the window. The city outside looked sharp and alive, people rushing, wheels turning, life happening at the pace of ambition. I turned back to Sloan. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked up at me and said, "Because I'm tired of watching her break people, and because if you walk away now, she wins. She gets to say you couldn't handle it, that you weren't good enough. But if you stay and let her break you, she wins even more." I thought for a long moment. Then I asked, "What would you do if you were me?" Sloan answered without hesitation. "I'd let her think she won. Then I'd burn every bridge she thought she controlled." I wasn't sure whether to be shocked or impressed. Maybe both. Sloan stood, smoothing her sleeves, ready to leave. She paused at the door and looked back at me. "She thinks she knows who you are. She doesn't. Don't let her write your story." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room for a long time. I replayed her words again and again. a reckless little problem. That wasn't just cruelty. That was business strategy disguised as social warfare. Everything I thought I knew about this engagement had been rewritten in less than a week. What started as a relationship built on love was now tangled in corporate tension, old money rituals, and a family that didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted an asset. But I had never been anyone's asset, and now I had a choice to make. I could walk away quietly and let the world believe I failed some private compatibility test, or I could keep going. Not for revenge, not for pride, but to show them, and myself, that my power wasn't something they could erase with a glass of wine and a smug smile. I picked up my pen and circled a name on the contract in front of me. It was time to pull a thread Veronica hadn't accounted for. The morning after Sloane's visit, I arrived at the office early. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want small talk or updates or smiles from the front desk. I just wanted to see the documents. 3 months before all this, my company had been approached by a legacy manufacturing firm looking to partner on a regional distribution overhaul. The deal was massive. High risk, high reward. My COO flagged several red flags in the proposal: non-compete clauses, aggressive exclusivity language, vague ethical transparency. We passed, politely but firmly. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. I had bigger, more flexible partnerships to manage. We were scaling fast, and that deal felt unnecessarily restrictive. We said no, and we moved on, until Sloane said she heard my name in one of Veronica's legal meetings. I sat down at my desk, opened the shared drive, and pulled every document we had related to that proposal. Company name, Callaway Synthesis Holdings. The same family name I was preparing to marry into. The legal entity was tucked under a series of smaller shell corporations. Nothing shady on the surface, but the paperwork told a different story. The distribution deal they had pushed so hard for was positioned to lock our company into a 5-year exclusivity clause. No exit clause. No room to pivot. And worse, a full data sharing provision disguised as an integration protocol. If I had signed it, they would have had complete access to our back-end systems, our logistics algorithms, our expansion roadmaps, everything I had built. It wasn't a partnership. It was an invasion. I pulled up the calendar archive and looked at the date the offer was officially rejected. It was 10 days before Landon proposed. 10 days before he got down on one knee at the vineyard and asked me to be his wife. 10 days before he promised forever and told me we were building a life as equals. And now I had to ask myself the question I had been avoiding since the wine hit my face. Was it a coincidence? I went through my emails, my notes, anything I could find that connected the timing. There it was, one internal message from my operations lead, noting that the final counteroffer from Callaway Synthesis had included a rush timeline and a subtle but forceful suggestion that personal alignment between leadership could ease future terms. I read that line again. Personal alignment. At the time, I thought it was business speak nonsense. Now it sounded like a warning. I sat back and stared at the screen. My hands were clenched without me realizing it. Not out of fear, not even anger. It was something colder than that. A stillness I had only ever felt once before, right before I fired a senior partner who tried to steal IP and sell it to a competitor. I opened a file labeled Reference Communications and scrolled through contact names. I found one I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a regular name on our business radar. It was listed as a consultant, Veronica C. Blakewell, listed as a strategic advisor. Veronica had been in the deal. She had been listed as an external consultant on the proposal my company rejected, which meant she knew exactly who I was before I ever stepped into her house. She knew my net worth. She knew my company's growth rate. She knew I was the one who personally shut down the partnership. She knew I was a threat. And then, 10 days later, her son proposed. I pushed away from the desk and stood up. My entire body felt hot and then suddenly cold. I wasn't just being disliked. I wasn't just being mistreated. I was being manipulated. I had walked into a house thinking I was about to meet my future in-laws, but they already knew everything about me. The dinner wasn't a test. It was a message. I wasn't welcome. I wasn't controllable. And I wasn't going to be tolerated if I didn't surrender what I had built. But here's what they miscalculated. They thought I was in love enough to play along. They thought I would compromise. Maybe they even thought I would feel lucky to marry up. They had no idea who I really was. I sat back down, opened a new folder, and started documenting everything. Every email, every signature, every timestamp. I sent it all to my legal team under a confidential header, not to start a lawsuit, not yet, just to build the record. I also started writing a new letter, this time to terminate any remaining open collaboration channels between my company and Callaway Synthesis. It was clean, precise, unemotional, businesslike. I didn't tell Landon, I didn't call him or text. I didn't give him a chance to shape the story or soften the reality. If he knew, he hadn't said a word. If he didn't know, he was more naive than I realized. Either way, I couldn't trust him anymore. The proposal was never about love. Not for his mother, not for the family, maybe not even for him. But the rejection, the one that mattered most, was mine. And I had just made it official. After I terminated the open deal with Callaway Synthesis, I expected an immediate fallout. I expected a furious phone call or at least a message from Landon asking what I had done. But for a full day, there was nothing. No one reacted, and that silence felt deliberate. I knew the Callaways were a family that moved behind curtains. They didn't scream or slam doors. They operated with quiet precision. So the silence was a message in itself. They were regrouping, reframing, preparing. When Landon finally did call, his voice was light, casual. "Hey, babe, are we still good for dinner tonight?" "Did you read your email?" I asked. "Which one?" "I sent an official termination notice to your mother's company. All remaining discussions are closed." He paused, then gave a short laugh. "Wait, what? Why would you do that?" "Because the deal was never going to happen. You knew that. And because your mother is the one who proposed it under a fake name." She was just consulting. That's not the same as lying. "She used a shell entity to disguise her stake in the deal, and you proposed to me 10 days after I shut it down. You don't see how that timing looks?" "You're being paranoid," he said, his tone dipping into irritation. "You're connecting dots that don't mean anything. My proposal had nothing to do with your company. You're spinning this into something it's not." I felt the old pressure rise in my chest, the kind of pressure that makes you second-guess your instincts. But I pushed it down. "You laughed when your mother threw wine in my face," I said calmly. "You called it a test. You asked me to apologize to her. You ignored everything I told you afterward. So now I'm asking, what exactly am I spinning?" "Jas," he said, like he was tired of explaining. "This is just how high-level families operate. You're acting like this is some conspiracy. It's not. My mom has strong opinions, but she's not evil. She's protecting the family. That's her job." "By demanding $300,000, he groaned. "That wasn't a real number. She was just trying to scare you." "She succeeded." There was another pause. I could hear him breathing on the line, and I could picture him pacing around his penthouse, annoyed that I wasn't making this easier. I used to think his composure was confidence. Now I saw it for what it was, performance. He had never been comfortable with conflict, not unless he could win without getting his hands dirty. "Listen," he said finally. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. My mother can be intense. She overstepped. I admit that, but let's fix this. Together, you and me." "There is no together when you treat my boundaries like suggestions. You're being emotional." The moment he said that, something inside me clicked, not snapped, clicked, like a lock turning. I ended the call without another word. That afternoon, I received a message from a board member at one of our satellite partners. He had been friendly until now, always eager to support our expansion. But this time, the tone was clipped. "Jasmine, I've been asked to reevaluate our terms in light of recent instability between our companies. There's some concern that your decision-making has become emotionally reactive. Can we schedule a call to clarify your long-term strategy?" I stared at the message, heart racing. They were moving quickly now, rewriting the narrative, making it look like I had acted out of bitterness. That I was the problem, that I was unstable, not decisive, not principled, just another emotional woman disrupting valuable deals because she couldn't handle pressure. I forwarded the message to my general counsel. No commentary, just documentation. 2 hours later, another one came in. A client we had been onboarding sent word that they were pausing until they had more visibility on leadership dynamics. It was subtle, surgical, No threats, no anger, just doubt, carefully planted and left to grow. I walked into the office kitchen and stood by the sink. One of my analysts looked up and asked if I was okay. I nodded. Fine. I wasn't fine. I was being dismantled by whispers. At home that night, I stared at my phone. No messages from Kiara, no follow-ups from my team. I knew what was happening. People didn't want to get involved. They didn't know who to believe, and some of them didn't want to believe that a rich family like the Callaways would target someone like me. They wanted it to be a misunderstanding. Easier that way. I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Everything I had built, everything I could still lose. And then I made a second list, what I was no longer willing to accept. Being told I was imagining things, being blamed for the reactions of others, being called emotional for defending my own boundaries. That night I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I wrote a memo, then another. I reviewed legal protections in every signed partnership. I flagged terms that could be used against me. I planned my next meeting with the board. They wanted to gaslight me into doubt, but I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let them erase me with polite silence and clean lies. I spent 3 days preparing the kind of response that doesn't get walked back. I stopped answering Landon's texts. I ignored the polite emails from board members pretending they were neutral. I didn't go online to defend myself. I didn't post some vague quote about strength or betrayal. I let the silence build, and I used it to sharpen every angle of my next move. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want payback. I wanted to reclaim what they tried to take, my credibility, my name, and my control. I called a meeting with my core executive team, just the 4 people who had been with me from the start. We met in the small original office downtown, the one with the creaky floorboards and mismatched chairs. I didn't want sleek conference rooms or glass walls. I wanted to be reminded of where we started. I laid everything out. I showed them the evidence, Veronica's stake in the deal, the timeline, the wine, the way our existing clients were now being pressured to question my leadership. Then I said, we can stay quiet and hope it dies down, or we can act. But if we act, there's no going back. They didn't hesitate. One by one, they nodded. No one asked if I was sure. No one asked if it was personal, because they knew me, and they knew the difference between emotion and strategy. We rewrote the company's positioning statement. We changed how we talk about our values, clearer, bolder, louder. No more soft branding. No more hiding our ethics behind corporate jargon. We made it clear that no deal would ever take priority over autonomy. Then I drafted a new press release. It was short, measured, not petty, just precise. Effective immediately, Carter Axis has terminated all partnership negotiations with Callaway Synthesis Holdings and its associated entities. This decision reflects our commitment to independent governance and ethical contracting. We wish the Callaway Group success in their future endeavors. No insults, no drama, just a door closing with the force of certainty. Before we hit send, I called my legal team. I wanted to confirm that every clause had been reviewed, every statement vetted. We weren't giving them a single crack to exploit. When I got the green light, I hit publish. It went live at 9:01 a.m. By 10:15, I received a call from Landon. I let it ring. Then came an email from Veronica's chief of communications, masked as a clarification request. I forwarded it directly to legal and then blocked the address. By noon, industry blogs had picked up the announcement. Analysts started speculating. A few even praised the move, a bold stand by Carter Axis to preserve independence in the face of legacy consolidation. That was their language, but I didn't argue with it. Later that day, I met with our top investor over lunch. She'd always been supportive, but this time I saw something else in her eyes: respect. You know what this means, right? She asked. I do. They'll come at you quietly, and publicly if they have to. I'm ready. She nodded and raised her glass. Good. You're going to need that spine. That night, Landon showed up at my door. I didn't answer. I watched him through the peephole, standing in his designer coat, looking stunned that I wouldn't come running. He knocked again and again. Then texted, "We need to talk." No, we didn't. I went to the couch, opened my laptop, and finished writing the speech I would give at the Quarterly Partners Summit. It wasn't about the Callaways. It wasn't even about betrayal. It was about what leadership looks like, when no one is protecting you from the fire, about what it means to choose integrity in a room full of people trained to respect only wealth and legacy. I would stand in that room. I would speak clearly, not carefully. I would not explain my emotions. I would explain my standards. The next morning, my assistant handed me a small box, no return address. I opened it. Inside was the engagement ring. No note, just the ring. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I missed him. I didn't. I missed who I thought he was, who I imagined we were building something with. I put the box in the back of my desk drawer, not as a keepsake, as a reminder. They tried to treat me like a transaction, like a woman who should be grateful to marry into power. They forgot I had my own. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw punches. I just walked into the heart of their network, smiled, and pulled the plug. And I wasn't done yet. The Callaways hosted an annual gala every spring at the Rosemont estate. It was their way of flexing status under the disguise of charity. Wealthy donors, high-profile partners, legacy investors, all packed into one ballroom dressed in black tie. You didn't just attend, you were watched, judged, ranked. I wasn't supposed to go that year. Landon and I were no longer together. The ring was gone. The invitations had been sent out weeks before everything fell apart, and I assumed I had been removed from the guest list. But I received an invitation anyway, hand-delivered, no return address. Just my name on cream stationery. I almost didn't go. It felt theatrical, manipulative. But something about the timing made me pause. It was the perfect stage for a spectacle. And I don't do performances. I do strategy. I called Sloan. She picked up on the first ring. "Did you get one too?" I asked. "Yes, and I think she's planning something." "Public?" "Always." I didn't ask how she knew. Sloan had grown up studying her mother's power plays like war maps. She knew the terrain. I arrived late, just enough to be noticed, but not enough to appear dramatic. I wore a suit, not a dress, no glitter, no silk, no softness. Power gray, sharp angles, clean lines. Every step I took into that ballroom was intentional. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I moved like someone with nothing to prove. Veronica spotted me immediately. She was standing near the fireplace, drink in hand, surrounded by a small circle of men in tuxedos. She looked at me like I was a stain she had scrubbed out that somehow reappeared. I watched her recover with perfect posture and call out across the room, "Jasmine!" How unexpected. "Thank you for the invitation," I said as I approached. I assumed I was off the list. "I believe in second chances," she said with a tight smile. "Besides, I heard you've been very busy, making waves." "I believe in clarity," I replied. "The rest is just noise." She laughed lightly and turned back to the circle. "Jasmine Carter," she announced. "Brilliant mind, fierce ambition, questionable instincts in partnerships, but a quick learner, I hear." One of the men beside her chuckled. I recognized him, a regional executive from a logistics firm we had both courted for months. He raised his glass to me. "Sometimes it takes a little fire to temper steel," I said, returning his gaze. "I suppose your mother taught you that." Veronica's smile faltered, just for a second. That was my cue. I stepped forward, calm and steady. Since we're all here, and since there's so much interest in how I conduct my business, I'd like to make something official. The room quieted. Phones lowered. Forks stilled. "I'm here tonight to confirm that Carter Axis has finalized a new strategic partnership with Westbridge Holdings, independent, long-term, transparent. As of last night, we've acquired their Eastern Corridor logistics, including the routes formerly serviced by Callaway Synthesis." Someone gasped. I didn't look to see who. I kept going. "The deal was closed quietly. It will go public tomorrow morning. But since we're all friends here, I wanted to deliver the news personally. Consider it a courtesy." Veronica's face didn't change, but her grip on the wine glass tightened. Her knuckles turned white. "I suppose congratulations are in order," she said slowly. "Thank you," I replied. "I hope this helps clarify any confusion about my leadership capacity or my emotional stability." Someone choked on their drink behind me. I didn't linger. I turned and walked through the crowd with my head high. No gloating, no smirk, just control. Behind me, I could hear the murmurs. The message had landed. I hadn't just removed myself from their influence, I had carved out a path that bypassed their gatekeeping entirely, and I had done it in front of every person they had ever used to maintain their image. As I reached the foyer, Landon appeared. He looked different. Smaller, not physically, but in presence, like something had cracked in him and he didn't know how to hold himself together anymore. "You really did it," he said. I nodded. "You destroyed my family's deal." Your family destroyed their own deal. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences." He looked down. "You never gave me a chance to explain. I gave you too many, and you used every one of them to defend the people who hurt me." He didn't argue. He didn't reach for me. For once he had nothing to say. I stepped outside into the cold night air. I felt light, not triumphant, just free. They thought they could use silence and shame to keep me small. They thought I wouldn't fight back unless I screamed. They were wrong. I fought back by thriving in full view. And I made sure they would remember the moment the empire they tried to use against me began to crumble. From the inside, where I had once been invited to stay. The Westbridge announcement went public the next morning at 7 a.m. By 7:18, articles had already started circulating. Industry analysts called it one of the most significant logistics realignments of the quarter. Carter Axis was trending across business feeds. Headlines read, "Emerging tech giant outpaces legacy competitor," and "Jasmine Carter makes bold power play." Reporters didn't mention Veronica Callaway by name, but anyone in the industry knew who lost that bid. Inside my office, the atmosphere was tense but electric. My team was focused. No one said much, but the energy in the room had shifted. For weeks, we had been on the defensive, cleaning up reputational damage, holding ground. Now we were the ones pushing forward. This was the first move of ours they couldn't spin or block. By 9:30, I received a formal letter from Callaway Synthesis. It was thinly veiled. "We regret the outcome of recent negotiations and the strategic decisions made by Carter Axis. We remain committed to our own internal vision for operational excellence." It was corporate language meant to save face, but the tone had changed. No more pressure, no more dominance, just distance. I forwarded it to legal with a simple instruction: no response. The same people who once tried to isolate me now kept their heads low. Landon didn't call. Richard didn't email. Veronica didn't send one of her signature passive-aggressive notes. Their silence spoke volumes. They had underestimated my reach. They thought I would be too emotional to make a clean move. They expected rage, not strategy. They were ready to defend themselves against outbursts, not outcomes. And now they were cornered by their own arrogance. Not everyone reacted well. Two of our smaller clients, ones with older ties to the Callaways, quietly pulled out. They didn't give a reason, but I didn't need one. Some people choose safety over truth. I wasn't angry. I just made a note and adjusted our forecasts. I would rather lose clients than compromise my company's values or align with people who flinch when pressure builds. My leadership team stood solid. Kiara, my head of strategy, pulled me aside that afternoon. "You know they're going to come at you again," she said. "I know. Harder this time. They'll try to make it personal, discredit you. Let them. I have records, and I have receipts." She studied me for a second, then nodded. "You're not the same person who walked into their house hoping to be liked." "I know," I said, and I'm glad she threw the wine. Kiara blinked. "Seriously?" I needed to see who they were. It was the most honest thing Veronica did the entire time. She laughed once, bitter and low. Some people use words. She used Merlot. Later that evening, I checked my personal email and found a message from Sloan. Short, private, typed like she didn't want to be found out. Subject line, "Thank you." Body, "You made it out. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I hope one day I will too." I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. And I knew any connection between us would be tracked. I wouldn't put her at risk. Outside the office, the public was still speculating. Blogs spun up timelines. Comment sections lit up with opinions. Some people cheered me on. Others said I was reckless for challenging an established name like Callaway. The truth didn't matter to them. They wanted drama, not nuance. But I had no intention of feeding their narratives. I gave one short interview. I spoke about business principles, about the importance of clean contracts, transparent negotiations, and protecting founder-led integrity. I didn't mention the wine. I didn't talk about Landon. That story belonged to me, not to public consumption. Still, the personal fallout lingered in quieter spaces. My mother called after reading the Westbridge article. She didn't bring up the engagement. She just said, "I'm proud of you, and I'm glad you didn't let them teach you how to be small." That stayed with me more than any headline. There were nights I lay awake and replayed everything. The laughter at the table, the wine soaking into my blouse, the way Landon stood there smiling while his mother tried to reduce me to a transaction. Sometimes I wondered if he ever regretted it, if he ever realized what he gave up. But regret wasn't something I needed from him. What I needed was what I had taken back: my name, my voice, my business, my story. They had tried to erase it all behind closed doors, through favors and whispers and polished lies. But I had put the truth on record, and I had done it without apology, and I wasn't finished yet. After everything fell apart, I didn't rush to feel better. I didn't jump into a new project or plan a dramatic self-care weekend. I didn't post some empowerment quote or act like I'd conquered the world. I let it sit. I let myself feel the weight of what happened, not just the betrayal, but the transformation. And then I began to move, not to rebuild what had been broken, but to redefine what I wanted next. The first real change happened in silence. I started walking every morning before the city woke up. Just me, the sound of my sneakers hitting pavement, and the air that felt sharp and honest in a way people rarely are. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't therapy. It was the first space where I didn't feel watched or judged or expected to perform. There was no family to impress, no man to protect, no boardroom politics, just motion, forward. I also changed my office. I took down every photograph that included Landon. There were a few corporate events, conference dinners, snapshots from power couple panels. I deleted them all, not out of anger, but out of clarity. They were no longer part of the story I was writing. They belonged to a version of me who didn't ask the right questions soon enough. I sat down with my team and made one final pivot in our culture policy. From now on, no partners or affiliates would be considered for strategic alliances without full third-party audits, and all personal ties would be disclosed and documented. Not because I expected the same betrayal again, but because I had learned how easily power can hide behind trust. That policy had my name on it. My team knew why. No one questioned it. Outside of work, I reconnected with friends I had unintentionally pushed away during the relationship. I called Kiara on a Sunday and asked her if she wanted to come over and watch terrible movies in sweatpants. She showed up 20 minutes later with 2 bottles of wine and no questions. That night, we laughed harder than I had in months, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing someone sees you exactly as you are and stays anyway. My mother flew in the following weekend. She hadn't visited me since I moved into my new place. When she walked in, she looked around and said, "It feels like you again." I nodded. I finally feel like me again. We didn't talk about Landon. We didn't talk about Veronica. Instead, we sat on the balcony drinking tea while she told me stories about when I was little, how stubborn I was, how fiercely I defended kids who got picked on, how I once told a teacher in 2nd grade that she was wrong and explained why with a diagram I made at home. I smiled through all of it because she wasn't trying to remind me who I used to be. She was reminding me that this version of me, the strong one, the strategic one, the one who didn't apologize for pushing back, wasn't new. She had always been there. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a Women in Leadership Summit in Boston. I almost declined. I didn't want to become a symbol or a cautionary tale. But the keynote topic gave me pause. How to lead when the room wants you silent. That I could speak to. I accepted. I didn't script the talk. I wrote down 5 truths on a note card and used them as anchors. When I stood on that stage, looking out at a room full of founders, creators, executives, and dreamers, I told the truth. Not about wine or dowries or families with too much money. I told the truth about what it feels like when people try to shape your identity to fit their comfort. I spoke about the price of integrity and how to protect it. I said power doesn't always look like the loudest voice or the biggest bank account. Sometimes power is walking away clean. Sometimes it's the decision not to bend, even when bending is easier. Afterward, 3 women approached me separately, each saying the same thing in different words. Thank you. I thought I was crazy. Now I don't. It wasn't closure. I wasn't looking for that anymore. Closure suggested something neat and resolved, and this wasn't that. This was movement. This was clarity. This was strength without noise. Healing, I realized, didn't mean forgetting. It meant recognizing the lessons and refusing to trade your worth for someone else's approval. It meant setting the kind of boundaries that don't wobble when tested. I wasn't healing back into who I was. I was healing into someone new, someone who wouldn't sit still at a long table again waiting for people to see her worth, someone who didn't smile to be liked but spoke to be heard, someone who knew that the right room would never require her silence. If you had told me a year ago that my engagement would end with a glass of wine thrown in my face and a public corporate standoff, I would have laughed. I would have said, I'm too careful, too composed, too private for something like that to happen to me. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it strips away every illusion so you can finally see what's real. What's real is this. I almost traded everything I built for proximity to people who never planned to respect me. I almost gave away pieces of myself to fit into a mold designed to keep women like me small, quiet, and dependent. And I nearly mistook access for love. The day Veronica threw that wine, I saw more than her cruelty. I saw the game, the test, the expectation that I would fold or fight on their terms. I chose neither. I didn't retaliate to get even. I acted to reclaim the story, not just for me, but for every woman who has ever been treated like a transaction in someone else's power play. This wasn't just about business. It was about dignity. It was about knowing that you can be successful and still be underestimated, that you can be in love and still be alone, that you can be invited in and still be unwelcome the moment you stop being easy to control. And most of all, it was about learning that silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the fallout. If you are watching this and you're in a room that makes you question your value, leave. If you're in a relationship that asks you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger, walk away. If you're offered acceptance with conditions, it's not acceptance at all. Don't waste time proving your worth to people who only recognize power when they believe they own it. Let your actions speak. Let your boundaries stand. Let your refusal be louder than their rejection. I didn't lose anything by walking away. I gained clarity, self-respect, and a business that reflects who I am, not who someone else tried to mold me into. The silence they used to shame me is the same silence I now use to move without permission. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm focused. And I've learned that you don't have to raise your voice to take up space. You just have to stop asking for permission. That's the power they never saw coming. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you or if you know someone who needs to hear it, share this video. Leave a comment below. I read them and I want to hear your thoughts, your stories, your truth. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. This channel is about more than drama. It's about real stories, hard lessons, and the strength it takes to choose yourself. Like the video if you found value in it, and stay with me. There's more coming. You're not alone.